You know what's fascinating? Most people go to sleep every night rehearsing the same life they don't want to live again tomorrow. They close their eyes, but their mind is still broke, still stressed, still trapped in yesterday's decisions, and then they wake up surprised that nothing changes. Let me tell you something. Wealth is not first created in your bank account. Wealth is created in your identity, in your repetition, in your private conversations with yourself when nobody is watching. Because here's what most people don't understand. You don't get rich by accident. You get rich by design, by discipline, by the silent promises you keep when there is no applause, no audience, no motivation video playing in your ears. Think about this. There was a man I once read about, not famous, not special, just ordinary. He worked a regular job, came home exhausted, and every night he had a habit. Before sleeping, he would sit on the edge of his bed and repeat one sentence to himself. I am building something bigger than my current life. No magic, no hype, no instant transformation, just repetition. Years later, that same man owned 3 businesses. People called him lucky, but luck had nothing to do with it. It was identity built in silence. Let me tell you something else. There was a woman working as a cashier in a small grocery store. Minimum wage, struggling, bills chasing her like shadows. But every night before sleep, she would do something unusual. She would visualize numbers in her bank account, not as fantasy, but as expectation. Not hope, expectation. And she didn't just imagine money, she started changing her behavior. She stopped spending like someone who was broke. She started learning like someone who was becoming rich. 5 years later, she didn't just leave that job, she bought the building that store was inside. Same place. Different identity. Here's what most people don't understand. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is direction. Every time you say no to distraction, you are saying yes to a different life. But the problem is, most people are emotionally attached to their current habits. They love comfort more than they love change. And then they sit back and wonder why life doesn't reward them differently. Think about this deeply. If your habits stayed exactly the same for the next 5 years, would your life improve or repeat? Don't answer quickly. Sit with it. Because that answer tells you everything about your future. I want you to understand something powerful tonight. When you say, I am rich, it is not a lie if you are building the behaviors of richness. Rich people don't just have money, they have structure. They wake up with intention. They manage time like it is more valuable than money. Because it is. Money can be lost and regained. Time once gone never returns. And yet, most people waste time like it is infinite and chase money like it is everything. Let me slow this down for you. There was a young man who had no degree, no connections, no support system. He used to clean offices at night. While cleaning, he would listen to business audiobooks on a cheap earphone. People laughed at him. They said, you are just a cleaner. Why are you listening to CEOs? But here's what they didn't see. He was not cleaning offices. He was building a mind. Today, he runs a logistics company with hundreds of employees. The job didn't change him. The identity did. And what most people fail to realize is this: success is not loud at the beginning. Success is silent, awkward, invisible. It looks like nothing is happening. You are working, sacrificing, repeating, and the world ignores you. But inside you, something is forming. A stronger version, a disciplined version, a focused version. Let me ask you something. What do you do when nobody is motivating you? What do you do when your energy is low, when your emotions are heavy, when quitting feels easier than continuing? That moment right there, that is the moment your future is decided. Not in public, not on social media, but in that private battle between what you want now and what you want most. Because here's the truth. Broke people think in terms of relief. Rich people think in terms of results. Broke thinking says, I need comfort now. Wealth thinking says, I discipline now so I can live free later. And I have seen it again and again. Two people start from the same place. Same opportunities, same environment. One chooses routine. The other chooses excuses. One chooses repetition, the other chooses emotion, and 10 years later, they are living in completely different worlds, and people call it destiny. But it was never destiny. It was daily decisions. Think about this deeply. Your life right now is not a mystery. It is a receipt. Every habit you repeated, every excuse you accepted, every uncomfortable truth you avoided, it all added up to today. But listen carefully. This is not about guilt. This is about power. Because the moment you understand that your life is built, not given, you become dangerous in the best way. You stop blaming. You stop waiting. You stop hoping like a spectator and start acting like a creator. There was a man who lost everything in business. Everything. Bankrupt. Humiliated. People stopped answering his calls, and for months he stayed in silence. No motivation, no support, nothing. But every morning he did one thing. He wrote down who he wanted to become. Not what he had lost. Who he wanted to become. Slowly his identity shifted. Slowly his habits changed. Slowly he started again. Today he is financially stable again, but when asked what changed, he said something powerful. I stopped identifying as a failure and started identifying as a builder again. Let me tell you something. Identity is stronger than circumstance. If you see yourself as broke, every opportunity will feel impossible. If you see yourself as becoming rich, every challenge becomes training. And here's where it gets even deeper. Your subconscious mind does not respond to wishes. It responds to repetition. That is why affirmations work only when they are aligned with action. Saying, I am rich while living in chaos creates conflict. But saying, I am becoming disciplined, I am building wealth, I am controlling my decisions while acting on it daily. That is transformation. Think about this. Every night you go to sleep, your brain is still listening. It is still processing. It is still forming identity patterns. So if the last thing you feed your mind is doubt, fear, stress, tomorrow you wake up in the same emotional prison. But if the last thing you feed your mind is direction, vision, identity, something changes silently over time. Most people underestimate repetition. They think change should feel dramatic, but real change feels boring at first. It feels like nothing is happening. Waking up early, reading, working, saving, learning, repeating. It feels ordinary. But ordinary repeated becomes extraordinary over time. And I need you to understand something very clearly. Nobody is coming to save your discipline. Nobody is coming to wake you up. Nobody is coming to force you to become who you are capable of becoming. That responsibility belongs to you alone. But here's the beautiful part. That responsibility is also your freedom. Because the moment you decide, I am rich in mindset, I am rich in discipline, I am rich in identity, you stop waiting for external permission. You start building internal authority. And when that happens, your decisions change. Your habits change. Your environment starts changing slowly around you. There was another story. A young man who used to sleep late every night, scrolling, consuming, escaping. One night, he wrote a simple sentence on his wall. The version of me I want is watching. He said that changed everything. Not instantly, but consistently. Because suddenly every action had an observer, his future self. And what he didn't realize was that the moment everything started changing was when what he didn't realize was that the moment everything started changing was when he stopped negotiating with himself in the mornings. Let me explain that, because this is where most people miss the entire point of transformation. It wasn't that his life suddenly became easier. It wasn't that opportunities magically appeared. It was that the internal conversation changed first. The moment he opened his eyes, there was no longer a debate. No more 5 more minutes. No more emotional bargaining. He simply got up. Think about this. Most people are not failing because life is hard. They are failing because they are inconsistent with their own decisions. One day they decide to change their life. The next day they ask their emotions for permission again. And emotions, let me tell you something, emotions are terrible managers of your future. They are designed for reaction, not direction. There was another man, I remember reading about him, worked in a warehouse lifting boxes every day. Same routine, same exhaustion, same paycheck cycle. But every night he had a habit that nobody saw. He would sit in silence and write one line, "My life is not stuck. My habits are." And then he did something most people would call pointless. He repeated small disciplined actions daily that no one applauded. Woke up earlier, learned skills after work, reduced spending slowly, and for months, nothing changed externally. But internally, everything was shifting. Here's what most people don't understand. Wealth is slow before it is visible. Just like a tree doesn't grow fruit the moment you plant it, your habits don't show results the moment you start them. But underground, something is happening. Roots are forming. Strength is building. Structure is developing where no one can see it. And I need you to think about this deeply. If you quit in the invisible stage, you never reach the visible stage. That's where most people lose. Not at the finish line, but in the silence before momentum. Let me tell you something else. There was a young woman who used to clean offices at night, and while cleaning, she would imagine owning a company. People laughed at her again and again. You clean floors, you don't run companies. But she didn't argue. She didn't defend. She just continued. And every night, she repeated the same mental image, not as fantasy, but as identity in progress. Years later, she didn't just build a company. She built a team that hired people who used to be in her exact position. And when someone asked her the secret, she said something very simple. I never cleaned floors. I trained my identity while cleaning floors. Think about this. What are you training right now? Because everything you do is training something. Every excuse is training weakness. Every repetition is training identity. Every time you choose comfort over discipline, you are reinforcing a version of yourself that you say you don't want to be. And yet, most people live completely unaware of this invisible training system. They think actions are isolated. They are not. Actions are identity reinforcement. Let me slow it down for you. If you tell yourself, I am rich, but your daily behavior is chaotic, scattered, impulsive, you are creating cognitive conflict. But if you say, I am becoming disciplined with money, I am building structure, I am controlling impulse, and you align even 1% better every day, something powerful starts happening. Your brain stops resisting your identity. Here's what most people don't understand. Your brain doesn't reject change because it hates success. It rejects change because it hates confusion. And confusion happens when your identity and your behavior don't match. So what do successful people do differently? They reduce the gap. They don't try to become rich overnight. They become reliable first. They become consistent first. They become predictable in discipline first. And from that foundation, wealth becomes a natural consequence, not a forced event. Let me tell you something. I once heard about a man who was drowning in debt. Creditors calling. Stress eating him alive. And one night he wrote something on paper that's changed everything for him. He wrote, I will never live like this again. Not emotionally, not dramatically, but decisively. And then he changed one habit, just one. He started tracking every single expense. At first it felt small, almost meaningless. But that small act created awareness. Awareness created control. Control created structure. Structure created growth. And this is where the real shift happens, not in motivation, but in awareness. Because when you become aware of your patterns, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer say, I don't know why my life is like this. You see it, you feel it. And that awareness, even though uncomfortable, becomes the doorway to change. Think about this. Most people want wealth, but they live in financial unconsciousness. They spend without thinking, earn without planning, repeat without tracking, and then they hope for a different result from the same behavior. That is not hope. That is repetition without learning. Let me tell you something deeper. Money is not just currency. Money is feedback. It tells you what the market values about your current skills, your current discipline, your current focus. If you want more money, you don't chase money. You upgrade the person producing the value. And I know this may sound simple, but simplicity is what most people ignore. Because simple truths demand consistency. And consistency demands discipline. And discipline demands sacrifice. There was a man who used to say, "I don't have time," until someone asked him, "What did you do for the last 5 hours?" Silence. Because the truth was not lack of time. It was lack of priority alignment. And that's where everything changes. When you stop asking, "Why am I not successful yet?" and start asking, "What am I repeating daily that is preventing success from becoming inevitable?" Because here's the truth. Success is not a surprise. It is a pattern. And failure is also a pattern. Let me go deeper. Your future is not waiting for you. It is being constructed by you in real time through habits you think are too small to matter. That skipped workout, that unnecessary purchase, that delayed decision, that avoided responsibility. They are not small. They are signals. They are votes. They are shaping identity silently. And what he didn't realize was that the moment everything started changing was when he stopped seeing his mornings as something to survive and started seeing them as the foundation of who he was becoming. And every time he woke up, he would look at that wall again and remind himself that the version of him he was building was no longer distant, but already forming in the decisions he was making today. And he just didn't yet understand how powerful that realization would become when he finally realized that the difference between who he was and who he was becoming was not some dramatic moment of destiny, but the quiet accumulation of decisions that looked almost meaningless at the time. And he never imagined that the smallest decision he made that morning would eventually begin to rewrite the entire direction of his life in a way that even his old self would struggle to recognize. Because let me tell you something. Most people are waiting for a breakthrough like it's going to arrive with fireworks. They think transformation feels loud, but real transformation feels like repetition. It feels like doing the same right thing when no one cares. It feels like choosing discipline when there is no emotional reward attached to it yet. And here's what most people don't understand. Your future is not created in moments of inspiration. It is created in moments of obedience. Think about this. There was a man who worked 2 jobs, exhausted every single day, barely had time to breathe. But every night, no matter how tired he was, he would sit for just 10 minutes and learn one skill online. Just 10 minutes. People told him, "That's nothing. That won't change your life." But he understood something they didn't. Consistency is not about intensity. It is about identity reinforcement. And over time, those 10 minutes became 30, then an hour. And then something shifted in him where he stopped thinking like an employee and started thinking like someone who was building leverage, building options, building escape velocity from his old reality. And slowly the world around him started responding differently, not because the world changed, but because he changed the way he showed up in it every single day. Without negotiation, without excuse, without waiting for perfect timing. Because perfect timing is a myth, people. Used to delay responsibility. And let me tell you something deeper. The richest people in the world are not emotionally different from you. They don't feel less fear. They don't feel less doubt. They just learned how to act without waiting for emotional permission. That's it. That is the separation. And once you understand that, you stop worshiping motivation and you start respecting discipline. There was another story, a young guy living in a small rented room, phone always in his hand, scrolling, consuming, comparing his life to people who were already years ahead of him. And every night he would feel that familiar pressure in his chest, that feeling of, I should be further than this. But nothing changed until one night he did something unusual. He didn't consume anything. No videos, no scrolling, no noise. He just sat there in silence and asked himself one question. What kind of person would I have to become for my life to naturally improve without luck? And that question didn't give him comfort. It gave him responsibility because suddenly he realized it was not about waiting for opportunity. It was about becoming the kind of person opportunity recognizes and responds to. And from that moment, he began to shift slowly, not dramatically, not instantly, but consistently. Let me tell you something. Your environment is not stronger than your identity. People think they are trapped by their situation, their city, their job, their family expectations. But the truth is, they are not trapped by environment. They are stabilized by habits. Because habits feel safe, even when they are destroying your future slowly and quietly. Think about this. If you repeat a behavior for long enough, it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like personality. That's why most people don't change. Not because they can't, but because they have become comfortable inside their own limitations. And comfort is the most expensive addiction a human being can have because it always trades your future for your present ease without you even noticing it happening in real time while you justify it with phrases like, I'm just tired today, or I'll start tomorrow, or right now is not the right time. And let me tell you something very clearly. There is no moment coming where discipline suddenly becomes easier. There is no magical phase where consistency stops feeling difficult. The difference is not difficulty. The difference is decision repetition under pressure. There was a man who used to wake up every morning at the same time, even on days when he had nothing urgent. People asked him why. He said something simple. I don't wake up for what I have to do. I wake up for who I am becoming, and that mindset alone separated him from people who kept living reactively, always responding to life instead of shaping it intentionally. And this is where wealth truly begins, not in income, not in luck, not in inheritance, but in identity stability. When you become someone who does not abandon long-term vision for short-term emotion, something powerful begins to form around you. Your decisions start stacking. Your discipline starts compounding. Your clarity starts sharpening. And suddenly you are no longer chasing success. You are building inevitability. Let me slow this down for you again. Every time you say, I am rich without structure, it is imagination. But every time you act with discipline, even when no one is watching, you are aligning yourself with the behavior of wealth. And over time, behavior always overrides belief because belief without action collapses under pressure, but action creates belief through evidence that your mind cannot deny anymore. And what he didn't realize was that the moment everything started changing was when he stopped measuring his progress in days or weeks and started measuring it in identity shifts, in the way he reacted to stress, in the way he handled silence, in the way he responded to temptation, in the way he began to notice that the same situations that once controlled him were now slowly losing their grip on him as he became more aware, more deliberate, more intentional with every single micro decision that most people dismiss as insignificant. But he had started to understand something very dangerous to his old life, that there is no such thing as insignificant when it comes to repetition, because repetition is what builds destiny quietly, without announcement, without permission, without asking anyone if it is allowed to change your life. Let me tell you something deeper. There was another man who used to work in a small city. Nothing special about his circumstances, nothing special about his background, and every day looked the same from the outside, but internally, something was breaking and rebuilding at the same time because he had reached a point where he could no longer ignore the discomfort of his own potential, that strange feeling where your current life becomes too small for your mind. And instead of running from it like most people do, he started studying it, observing it, asking himself what exactly is missing, not in the world, but in him. And the answer was uncomfortable. Consistency, not intelligence, not opportunity, not luck, consistency. And here's what most people don't understand. Consistency is not a personality trait. It is a trained response under emotional resistance. It is what you do when you don't feel like doing it. It is what you do when there is no immediate reward. It is what you do when quitting would feel easier and even justified. That is where wealth is formed. In the moments nobody sees, in the decisions nobody claps for, in the discipline that feels invisible at first but becomes undeniable later. Think about this. There was a young guy who started waking up at 5 a.m. every day. At first, nothing changed. Same job, same money, same environment. People even mocked him, saying, "You are wasting your time. Nothing is happening." But what they didn't see was that every morning he was building something more powerful than money. He was building identity certainty. Because every time he woke up when it was uncomfortable, he was proving to himself that he is not controlled by emotion anymore. He is controlled by decision. And that internal shift, that is where everything begins to bend. Let me slow it down for you. Most people think success is about adding more. More skills, more hustle, more hours, more effort. But the real transformation starts when you remove the internal contradiction between who you say you are and what you actually do. Because contradiction creates weakness. Alignment creates power. There was another story, a man who used to struggle financially for years, always chasing quick solutions, always jumping from one idea to another, never staying long enough to master anything. And every time something got difficult, he interpreted it as a sign to stop instead of a sign to strengthen. And one day, after hitting another failure, something inside him finally shifted, not dramatically, not emotionally like in movies, but quietly, painfully, clearly. He realized the problem was not the ideas. It was his inability to stay consistent long enough for ideas to mature into results. So he made a decision, not a motivational decision, a structural one. He stopped chasing multiple directions and committed to one path. And the first few months felt worse because discipline always exposes your impatience before it rewards your effort. But he stayed, and staying became the skill. And over time, staying turned into mastery, and mastery turned into income, and income turned into freedom. But none of it started with money. It started with endurance. Think about this deeply. Endurance is the real currency of transformation. Because anyone can start. Very few can continue when nothing is happening yet. And this is where your mind must shift. You are not trying to become rich. In a moment, you are trying to become the kind of person who cannot stay poor in behavior. There is a difference. One is external. The other is structural. Let me tell you something very real. Every habit you repeat is casting a vote for your identity. Every time you choose discipline, you are voting for a stronger version of yourself. Every time you choose distraction, you are voting for the weaker version. And over time, those votes become your life without you noticing the election happening. And what he didn't realize was that the moment everything started changing was when he stopped asking, when will my life finally change? And started asking, who must I repeatedly become in order for change to no longer be optional, but inevitable? Because every day he was no longer just living life. He was quietly rewriting the internal operating system of his mind through repetition, through discomfort, through moments where he wanted to stop but didn't, and through nights where he felt alone in the process, but still continued forward, even when the results were invisible. And he kept going deeper into that identity shift until one night he sat there again in silence and realized that something inside him had already started becoming someone he no longer needed permission to become. And that's where everything comes together. Let me tell you something. You were never meant to live trapped inside the version of you that only survives the day. You were meant to evolve past it. But evolution doesn't happen through wishes. It happens through repetition, through discipline, through the quiet decision to stop negotiating with your potential. Think about this clearly. Everything you are living right now is not a mystery. It is a pattern, a reflection of repeated choices. And the moment you understand that, you also understand something powerful. If it was built it can be rebuilt. If it was learned, it can be relearned. If it was created, it can be changed. Here's what most people don't understand. Wealth is not just money in your account. Wealth is control over your impulses. Wealth is structure in your habits. Wealth is clarity in your decisions when life gets noisy. Because money without discipline disappears, but discipline without money always creates it. So when you say, I am rich, don't say it as escape. Say it as direction. Say it as identity. Say it as a standard you refuse to drop below again. Because the real shift happens when your behavior starts matching your declaration. Let me remind you of something deeply important. Every successful person you admire was once invisible, once doubted, once inconsistent. But at some point, they made a decision that changed everything. They stopped quitting on themselves, not the world, themselves. And that is the real battle every night when you close your eyes. Not against people, not against circumstances, but against the version of you that wants comfort over growth, ease over discipline, distraction over direction. If you win that battle repeatedly, quietly, consistently, your life has no choice but to transform. Because success is not something you chase. It is something you become through accumulation, through identity reinforcement, through becoming so consistent in your standards that your results eventually have no option but to rise to meet them. And maybe right now, you are not where you want to be. But that is not the final sentence of your story. It is just the starting condition. And starting conditions do not define destinations. Choices do. So tonight, when everything goes quiet and the world stops talking to you and it's just you and your thoughts, understand this one thing deeply. You are not stuck. You are in process. And process always rewards those who stay long enough to become unrecognizable to their old life. And when you wake up tomorrow, there will be a moment, a small moment, almost invisible, where you either return to your old identity or you step again into the identity you keep claiming. And that choice, repeated enough times, becomes everything. Because what he finally understood was that wealth was never waiting in the future. It was being built in the present through every disciplined action, every quiet sacrifice, every moment of choosing long-term identity over short-term emotion, until eventually he no longer had to think about change because he had already become it.